Over the years, I've watched Edgar Cayce intentionally leave his physical body in order to help people who asked him for help. During the sessions, he looked asleep. Meanwhile, his soul was moving to levels of existence beyond physical perception. Cayce's sleeping described the world he saw. It was from him that he got the necessary information, said Hugh Lynn Cayce, the eldest son of a famous psychic. Edgar Cayce was an outstanding American mystic and medium who was nicknamed the Sleeping Prophet by journalists due to the fact that during his sessions he fell into a stupor comparable to sleep. He was born in 1877 on a farm near Hopkinsville, Kentucky. His parents did not notice any special features for their firstborn. The oddities began later when the boy reached school age. Because of his absent-mindedness, Edgar could not boast of success in his studies. Spelling was especially difficult for the child. The school teacher was the boy's uncle. He often visited his brother Leslie, Edgar's father, to complain about a negligent student. After such visits, scandals broke out in the family. Once, in anger, Leslie slapped his son on the back of the head. The child felt dizzy from the blow, and immediately he heard a soft female voice convincing him that all the troubles with his studies were over from now on. To memorize the learning material, Edgar just needs to get some sleep, putting textbooks under his head instead of a pillow. Now my studies are getting better. After high school, Cayce discovered his healing gift. He never refused to help anyone and never demanded payment for his services. Edgar's psychic power gradually grew. He could diagnose and treat various diseases during trance, even from a distance and by letter, predict wars, earthquakes, revolutions, and major accidents, tell about past lives, reincarnation, and ancient history. He also talked about the structure of the universe and the lost civilizations. Cayce gained national fame after laudatory articles. The number of people who wanted to see a medium grew so much that it was necessary to hire assistants who took shorthand notes of the information received during the sessions, conducted correspondence, and organized the sessions. He died in 1945 at the age of 67, and his last words were, "How our world needs God now." Edgar Cayce has remained in history as a unique mystic whose predictions and healing abilities continue to amaze and intrigue people even decades after his death. Hugh Lynn began keeping records of his father's activities during Edgar's lifetime. The medium himself supplemented the information and clarified the details. It was these work notes and diaries that became the basis of the book, There Is No Death or Another Door of God. It carefully collects data on clairvoyant sessions. We can practically learn from the medium himself what Edgar Cayce said about the human soul and what awaits each of us after the end of earthly life. A person is a soul that has its own body. One day, an acquaintance of his turned to Hugh Lynn for help. Some time ago, this man had an accident at work. He touched a bare wire and received a high-voltage discharge. My colleagues, who were near me at that moment, immediately took me to the hospital. However, I wasn't in it. I went home to my wife. I saw her sitting at home at the table with our neighbor. They were drinking coffee and talking. I was standing right in front of them, but they didn't pay any attention to me, said an acquaintance of Hugh Lynn. Then he heard the phone ring. His wife picked up the phone. The woman was informed that she urgently needed to go to the hospital, as her husband was there. The man watched as his worried wife searched for car keys and then went to the hospital with her neighbor. I wanted to support my wife, so I ended up in the car with her. But all my attempts to get her attention were unsuccessful. Shortly after my wife arrived at the hospital, I felt like I was returning to my body. I felt severe pain from the electric shock. The victim described the incident. Later, this man told his wife about what he had been through. However, she called his story just a figment of the imagination. Therefore, the hero of this story turned to Hugh Lynn for his father to clarify this case. There is nothing surprising in this. A person is a soul that has its own body. Every person's soul leaves their body during sleep or loss of consciousness. Therefore, sleep can be called a shadow of the state in which we begin to live, having completed our life on earth, explained Edgar Cayce. The heir of the great mystic has heard similar stories from many. He did not inherit superpowers from his father, but he was still very sensitive to the manifestations of mystical events. That's what Hugh himself said about it. Being the son of Edgar Cayce is like having a powerful microscope or telescope in your room. It allowed me to perceive things that are usually hidden from us. I began to realize that the world is much more complicated than many people realize, and that there is not only the world that we distinguish through the five senses. When I traveled around the country, different people came to me to share their experiences. Here is one such example. After a lecture in Sacramento, a woman came up to me and said, "I was here in California, and my daughter stayed in Oregon to give birth. I wanted to go see the baby." I spoke to her on the phone, and she informed me that the birth was successful. I was going to go to her place, but I haven't been able to get out yet. One evening, I was waiting for my husband to return and was cooking dinner. Suddenly, I wanted to lie down. I lay down on the bed without even taking off my kitchen apron and fell into a kind of half-sleep. Suddenly, I was at my daughter's house in Oregon. I saw her and her husband, who came home from work at that moment, picked up the baby and started rocking him. Then they both turned around as if they saw me in the doorway. They were very surprised, and as I guess, their shocked appearance prompted me to return to my body, to California. That is, to where I was at that moment. A few seconds later, the phone rang. My daughter wanted to know where I was and if I was okay. They thought I was dead. They saw me in Oregon. The funny thing was that they saw me not in an apron, but in my most elegant dress, the one I had recently bought specifically for a trip to Oregon. It's like I just put it on and came to them. Edgar became interested in his son's story and contacted the narrator's daughter and son-in-law. They fully confirmed the woman's words and asked the seer to explain how this became possible. Cayce Sr. explained as follows. Very often our human eye cannot see even the most ordinary objects if they are moving too fast for our perception. Here are some of these examples. I have often flown in airplanes with 4 large propellers. Their blades prevented me from seeing what was behind them. But when the engine started, the blades began to move. Then, as the rotation speed increased, they became blurry and finally completely disappeared from view. They were moving so fast that I could no longer distinguish them, but I could see what was on the other side of the blades. The propellers were disappearing right before my eyes. We see similar examples all the time. The blades of a home fan or a stockade that stops being visible when driving past at high speed. But we forget that the perception of our consciousness is also limited. When you boil water, it turns into steam. That is, it just changes shape. But she stays here anyway. We can use it to run a steam engine or to hoot a horn. We can also see how this steam condenses on the window and turns back into water. When the water boils away, we lose sight of it, but it stays here anyway. Television is a great example. Signals that can be converted into voice and image. We love watching TV programs, but we can't perceive these signals without a TV, which is set up in a special way to pick them up. The same can be said about radio signals, about voice and music. Without a radio receiver that picks them up, we are not able to perceive them. Therefore, there are material and energy structures around us that we cannot perceive with our 5 senses: rotating propellers, liquid turning into steam, television signals, and radio waves. They are the same matter or energy, but moving or vibrating too fast for the human eye. Sometimes these phenomena are perceived unconsciously. The problem is that when we do unconsciously perceive them, we completely deny their reality. After all, we are sure that they do not exist. If we want to see what is happening on the subtle plane, we need to develop the sensitivity of the soul and not use physical vision for this purpose. After all, the subtle plane is an immaterial place through which the human soul passes after death before entering the spiritual world. Being here, a person sees with his consciousness, easily perceiving energy flows. With death on the physical plane, our birth on the spiritual plane begins. What happened to Edgar Cayce when he left his physical consciousness? That's what the seer himself answered this question. When I entered unconsciousness, I realized that I was leaving my body and becoming a small dot. A clear, straight, and thin line appeared in front of me, like a ray of white light. There was mist and smoke on both sides, as well as many ghostly figures that seemed to be crying out for help. As I followed the beam of light, the path cleared. The figures on both sides became more distinct, taking on clearer outlines. but it seemed like they were trying to lead me astray, away from my goal. However, thanks to this narrow path that opened up in front of me, I continued to move forward. After a while, I found myself in a place where these figures seemed like mere ghosts. Now they were urging me on rather than trying to stop me. Then they took shape and seemed to be busy with their activities, and if they paid any attention to me at all, it was more likely to hurry me up again. Finally, I came to the hill where the temple stood. I entered this temple and found myself in a large hall that looked very much like a library, but had no visible walls or ceiling. This place was the repository. There were books about human lives. They reflected the activities of each individual, and all I had to do was get a record of the individual for whom I was looking for information. This is my personal experience, and it is always very real. Going through these dimensions, I maintained a state of heightened awareness. I think that the realms I went through to get spiritual information were the same realms that a soul goes through after physical death. Hugh Lynn was surprised that his father, after returning to his physical consciousness, never remembered what he had said when he was asleep. One day I asked my father why he doesn't remember anything when he's traveling outside of his physical consciousness. He told me, if I realized what my soul was going through at such moments, my mind would experience tremendous stress that could drive a person crazy. And they find me a little crazy without that. Hugh Lynn recalled about such a conversation with his father. Transmitting information from the spiritual repository, Edgar Cayce in some messages talked about what awaits a person after the end of his earthly life. A person dies here to be born there. In the same way, as the moment of our birth in the physical body becomes for us the beginning of our journey on earth, so from the moment of death on the physical plane begins our birth on the spiritual plane. In this ideal world, the moment of birth represents the separation of the energies of the spirit and soul from what connected them to earthly life. According to Hugh Lynn, his father rarely conveyed the messages about life he received on the subtle plane, as he did not have such a task. However, even these rare messages can tell a lot about life after death. On July 9, 1934, after the end of the session, but even before he fully woke up, my father began to talk to someone again. My mother was present during this conversation, among others. Her father asked her to give her this message. Mom, Uncle Porter, Grandpa and I are here together, and we're all waiting for you to come, and we'll all be there. Grandpa built a nice house here. I still play baseball, and as before, I am the captain of the team. Analyzing the recording of this conversation, Cayce assumed that this message was given to him by Evans, the younger brother of his wife Gertrude, who was ill with tuberculosis and left earthly life many years ago. Before his illness, Evans loved playing baseball. He also mentioned their grandfather, who during his lifetime dreamed of building a house so that each of his family members could return here in difficult times. However, in his earthly life, the house was never completed. This communication experience showed that next to us in the room at that moment were those whom, from a physical point of view, we considered dead. Apparently, they were looking for an opportunity to inform us that their souls continue to live, but only in a world of more subtle matters, concluded Edgar Cayce. Do you think there is life after death? Write your opinion in the comments. If you want to learn more about life after death and the afterlife, then I recommend watching my other videos. Please don't forget to like this video if you liked it. See you soon and have a nice day.